so you've had 10 homicide trials. Is that right? And
Yeah,
what's
that's
it
right.
like when you're in a courtroom and it's your words, your thoughts, I mean, obviously it's the evidence and the people who are
Mhm.
involved, but you're ultimately the conductor of your client's defense, and his life is literally on the line. What's that like? How stressful is that?
Well, it's an awesome responsibility, and it's in a lot of ways, it's a huge burden to be stuck in that place, and yeah, it's extremely frightening and nerve bending. I would say though, by the time I did my first homicide trial, I had done several others where there was a lot running on it. And I guess in that sense, it didn't, kind of shock me in the way that it might, because that type of situation is a situation that I love. I kind of crave and enjoy that level of battle, and that confrontation and that responsibility. I like that, and in some ways, I guess, you know, however I was composed, I was composed in part to do that. Doing those, yeah, they're heavy. I guess the distinction is that they involve a complexity. There's typically expert witnesses and a larger number of witnesses, a bigger body of law, and a level of play that's just a step or two above. The judges are very engaged, and they want to work hard and get the case right, so they expect a lot of preparation, and you bring that preparation, but your opposing counsel is typically a higher level attorney, and they're ready to bring that. Yeah, it's a big battle. On top of that, you often find some media attention. So there's things circling in the background. You're going to have lots of interest from the decedent's family, but your own client's family. Your client is typically going to be in jail, which was not new for me, but it's just it's a heavy burden. And the thing is with those is you can really win big. And I've had cases where I feel like I ran the floor and it was amazing. And what we say, I walked my client. So, he got out of jail off of a very serious, intense case. But I've also had other cases where it went really bad. They're in prison for life. And that's an intense thing. It's hard to you don't forget that, for the rest of my time. I know that's going to be somebody that I worked for and I cared about. And that obviously the details, one way or another, they weren't good, but that's somebody that I represented, that's always going to be in prison. And that's it's kind of it's a heavy reality.
Hmm.
So there's a lot there. It is kind of an intense battle, intellectual and endurance, because it goes on, and these aren't short trials. But in a lot of ways they're exciting, because I have a great co-counsel, and we're doing this together. I've had great interns. One of my interns, he's actually an associate for me now in my firm, and we worked on a couple of great trials together. So you really kind of you have a team, and I find that I'm usually able to keep a level of collegiality with the opposing counsel and the judge, and try to keep it as a civilized, and I try to think a high-minded, because there was a time when we had, if you had a dispute, it was going to be barbaric, and we, I don't know, jump to conclusions, and might makes right. But we have a complex, and I think relatively high-minded process. But also it's imbued by our Constitution and our rights, and our the promise that we're going to protect the individual and hold that individual and their worth to a high level, and require the government to really put a lot of work into it, and have a high level of certainty. and try to weed out bias and prejudice.